Welcome everyone to our session on grid availability and constraint, global overview and regional perspective. Prior to me introducing our wonderful speaker, and while we're waiting for people to join us, I will give some background information about who we are, who is QPQ, and a lot of hellos. Hi, everyone, please join the room. So basically, this webinar is one of the webinar in series that we're organizing as a part of our Funding Accelerator program. This is already, I think, fifth. It's dedicated to grid, as I said. We have a wonderful expert, Giovanni Ciorciarini, who will be talking about covering this in depth. Just for those who don't know us, QPQ is a digitally enabled deal advisory and platform created in support of investors and project developers or in green energy sector. We focus primarily on renewable energy, waste energy, hydrogen, and energy storage. Basically, we are based in Dubai, but our experts in reach is global. So we have kind of developed and very proud in supporting and having wonderful, great working relationships with a very large network of developers in green energy sector. With kind of strong origination capabilities, but also very strong investor network. I mean, we now work closely with over 300 leading investors in these sectors. That's private equity firms, infrastructure funds, and leading global IPPs. So, as I said, with a very kind of very narrow focus on sectors, geographically we are agnostic. We support all the regions that support green energy transition with a stable rule of law. And yes, and our mission is actually, our QPQ mission is to make our planet green again, so our children have a inhabitable green world to live in. So in terms of, so let me just quickly tell you a little bit more about our Funding Accelerator program. So the purpose of the program is to support green energy project developers in accelerate development and secure and finance, secure financing and secure world-class partners for your green energy projects. As I said, we pride ourselves with quite a strong investor network, with strong relationships. And we basically, yes, so this program is to support green energy project developers in the four sectors that I mentioned. That is the renewable energy, waste energy, hydrogen, and energy storage. Qualifying criteria for project, it has to be developed, initiated by professional team. We can support projects in different development phases, depending on the technology. Solar, we can support from pretty much early stage, depending on the country. But as I said, if country is with good rule of law, I mean, our main focus is US, Europe, South America, selected countries in Africa, stable ones, Asia, Southeast Asia, Australia. If it's a good project in India, we also can do. I mean, in Asia and Southeast Asia, I mean, there are selected countries in Asia that would depends, right? So all projects go to, Giovanni is joining our stage. Thank you, Giovanni. I'll introduce him shortly. All projects go through the vetting and grooming of our advisors, and we have a very strong advisory team. And then basically the if we consider project investor ready, after initial kind of assessment and coaching and advising from our advisors, we can actually kind of in bespoke manner present that project to our current investor network, which is quite large already. But this program will culminate in an annual event, which will take place in November. And that event will be a very large event, which will actually attract investors from all over the world. I mean, we had a very successful event last year. Out of the submission, as you understand, it was in November. These projects don't get funded like that fast, right? It takes time, but probably 50% or 60% in due diligence. A lot of them are closing now. Yes, we're kind of very proud to actually make this contribution. So as I said, in terms of qualifying criteria, a project needs to be initiated by a professional team across four technologies sectors that I mentioned. And then the rest, our advisors will kind of guide you and coach you with, right? So coach you on. So now in terms of, and then there will be final very large event, which I just mentioned in November, right? So that's, I think I covered everything. Vlad, can you please share their kind of notes with our handout?
Yeah, sure. So just a few kind of comments on what you mentioned. We relatively geography agnostic. Of course, those markets that Alexander mentioned are in our heat map, and obviously we're kind of focusing on projects in those sectors. I think you covered the subsectors and the project size and our focus on project finance.
I didn't mention project size, Vlad. So thank you for noting that. You can come.
So subsector. I'll just quickly run through the subsectors. Full spectrum of renewables, solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, waste to energy, biomass, biofuels, energy storage, and hydrogen production. So those kind of core sectors that we focus on. As I mentioned, geography agnostic, but industry or subsector specific. There was a question in the chat, is Madagascar figured in the country of investment? Definitely does. We do have actually, I think, one or two projects in Madagascar. Project size, most of the projects in our pipeline are actually above $30 million, starting from 30 and between 30 and 300 is probably kind of average, but then considering the size of or the nature of investors we work with, like large IPPs, in here in the region, also in Europe and in Japan, they want the bigger the better. So we do have some projects that exceed $1 billion mark. And then we also have a small number of investors who can look at slightly smaller projects, starting from 10 million and above, but not really less than 10 million. And this actually brings me to the next point about our focus on project finance. Because we don't do venture, we don't have venture capital investors in our network, so we don't really work with ventures or startups. Our focus is 100% on project finance, both kind of bringing strategic equity partners into projects, and also sometimes in certain countries where our help is required, we can also help raising debt. So that's kind of, I think, in a nutshell. I think Giovanni is having a bit of an issue connecting. I can see him kind of connected and then reconnecting. And we had a trial session just before we started. So we're going to give him a few more minutes. And
in the meantime, let me introduce Giovanni.
Yeah, and also just so I kind of wrap up my part, you mentioned about the funding accelerator and funding the event and the program. I have posted a couple of links in the chat window. You can learn all about those events and about the event and the program and the criteria there. In the handout section, you can download Giovanni's presentation, and hopefully we'll be able to figure out the technical issue, and then he'll take you through that presentation. But and also, as we kind of progress through through this webinar, you can ask questions and post them in the chat. We should have enough time in the end of the session for the Q&A. So now I'll let Oksana continue. I'll try to help Giovanni fix his.
Okay, that's looking promising. We never had.
Giovanni, can you hear us? I think it's just because it was going kind of connecting, reconnecting, and now it seems to be.
Giovanni, are you here? Okay. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Oh yes, that's good. Oh my gosh, I had so many. Okay, I never had any issues with connecting with you, Giovanni, ever. But it's always when it's a webinar, something happens, right? So okay, thank God. I'm relieved now. So let me.
Yeah, right on time. So you can start with introducing Giovanni.
Yes. So ladies and gentlemen, I think that yes. First of all, I'm impressed by the number of people in the room. We normally kind of gather quite a great crowd, but I thought it's summer and people already kind of heading for holidays, and I thought that we'll have a kind of not as many people, but it's great. So let me introduce you to Giovanni. So Giovanni's career, like with experience over 30 years in various industries, but primarily this is infrastructure, power, oil and gas, energy, engineering and construction and utilities, and kind of Giovanni kind of worked across the globe in these sectors and reached very senior ranks in very senior positions. Incredible wealth of understanding of energy sector and specifically grid. So Giovanni is one of my colleague. I love working with Giovanni, but he is our expert on grid and with a great, actually quite a global knowledge across various regions. So Giovanni will talk about grid and go in more depth with that. Giovanni, to you.
Yeah.
Yep, we're gonna leave the stage. Giovanni, so it's all yours. So just to remind everyone, handouts.
Yeah.
Sorry. Handouts are in. If anyone wants to download it, it's in the handout section. Chat, please ask the questions. We'll try to answer as many of them as possible in the end, so we don't kind of interrupt Giovanni. And for now, we'll kind of me and Oksana will get off the stage and let Giovanni continue.
Okay, Giovanni, you had a question, right?
No, I'm trying to reopen the presentation. Just a few seconds, please.
Sure. If you're struggling with, because we tested the screen sharing, it was also working. In case if your system is slow, we can share the presentation from our side, and they'll just flick through the slides. But I'll stay on the stage, and you'll just guide me when you want to move to the next slide. But let's see if you can do it from your side. It looks like it might be an internet issue, maybe a bit slow internet, because it feels like
it could be, but it's been working. It's been working very well earlier when we tested it, so I mean, it should go. Okay, trying to open the files.
No luck?
In the meantime, while Giovanni is trying to share the screen, we have a question. For the funding accelerator, do the program accelerator support research institutes with findings regarding green energy projects based in Morocco? Rana, do you want to kind of,
supporting research institute in what?
Yeah, support research institutes with findings regarding green energy projects.
Well, I mean, we need to understand what is the research in what findings.
In general, it sounds like it wouldn't fit the project finance requirement, area.
Scope, yes.
It's more kind of specific R&D, and perhaps when it moves to a specific technology, it would require venture capital. So I don't think it would fit the requirements of our investors. But perhaps it was Mohammed who shared this question. If Mohammed, you want to send me an email?
Yes, take it offline.
Yeah, I would be happy to look at it.
Okay, Giovanni is here.
Got his presentation sorted, so let's
get on with that.
Okay,
fantastic.
Yeah. So, good afternoon, everybody. Today's subject is grid. We are QPQ is focused on projects on renewables, waste to energy, CCS, hydrogen, a number of projects. And grid normally for us developing projects is taken as either an obstacle or a bottleneck for our activity. I'm biased because I come from a transmission business, so I tend to consider the grid, the network, and enabler. And in this presentation, I'm going to try to explain why. How do I want to do it? So first of all, I would like to share with you what are the constraints and the pillars at the end of the day of the system, of the grid transmission and distribution system. I would like to share also an understanding why I think that the backbone of any regional system, extended system, is at the end of the day the grid, the transmission. We will have a look at the global market overview for grid transmission and distribution, and also to understand the different speeds in different regions in terms of project execution. We will go through quickly the evolution of the transmission market, and especially from a regulatory perspective, because in my opinion that explains a lot of what's going on and why there are investments that are faster in some regions than others. We go then to the business model, how different in different geographies projects or the transmission network, the grid expands thanks to what. Some consideration in respect of the technology, the most commonly used nowadays, and what are the constraints for us to accelerate, if you want, in the future. And we'll close with a quick look at the distribution side of the networks and the implication of the energy transmission for the distribution side. So I will start first of all trying to associate a catastrophic event to the grid. Now we have seen the impact of fires in California on the high voltage network, and we have learned that this catastrophic event may create a snowball effect if the grid is not properly protected. We have also seen how the grid is called more and more to operate in severe conditions. I mean, winter is a typical condition when you have frozen connection and everything falls down. But I would like here to use this opportunity to share with you some learnings of a couple of events. First of all, the one that occurred in Texas in February 15, 2021, where basically it was for a few days a blackout that brought people without power in a very, modern and industrialized country. How that it happened, I mean, a big gap in between the demand and the power available at that time, combined perhaps a big gap was, we were at a winter peak, 69 gigawatt demand, and the power supply was falling down because of different effects, including the one obviously of extreme weather conditions. But also the map above shows a system, the Texas system, the ERCOT system, that is quite isolated compared to with the rest of the United States. Actually, the United States are somehow isolated in three main systems, and the ERCOT system, the Texas one, is one of them. And it was isolated at that time when it occurred. So he had to fix the problem. They had to fix a problem within an isolated system. That was not easy. That's why such an important impact for people, important impact for the industry. I would like now to move a moment and take this opportunity to show a similar event that happened few days earlier in January 21 in Europe. And I think most of us haven't heard about it. It happened in January. Oksana, can you see the ENTSO-E document that I'm projecting? Yeah, I hope you can see.
Stage. Yeah, we can see it. We can see it.
Now,
we cannot respond straight away because we are off the stage, so it takes us a couple of seconds to go back on the stage.
Thank you.
So when you guys
Thank you. I'm sharing this document because it's an interesting document published by ENTSO-E. ENTSO-E is the Association of the Transmission System Operator of Europe. And following the event, since this was a serious event, there was an investigation. The investigation of this event analyzed the sequence that happened on the 8th of January 2021 at 14:04, starting from an anonymous substation in Croatia that, for a very silly reason, had the decoupling of two bus bars. The two bus bars were connecting somehow were strategic in connecting. You see them in the picture down there, in connecting the Southern European and Northern European electrical system, which is all connected. Now, that disconnection caused an effect on the entire grid, because at that time, the North European system was importing power from the Southern European system. So there was an exchange of over 6 gigawatt power in between the North and Southern hemisphere, area of Europe. So what happened was that because of this disconnection, Europe was basically divided into systems. The Southern European system and the Northern European system. By the disconnection, what happened was that Northern European system had an excess in load. So the excess in load brought to a fall in the frequency of the network, while the Southern European system had now excess of power, surplus of power, that brought to an increase of the frequency of the network. Now, in this situation, what would have happened if what happened subsequently would not have taken place, would have been that the entire European continent would have fallen on a blackout. But it didn't, because first of all, the two systems disconnected, and France and Italy were able to activate the contractor interoperable services, which reduced the load on the entire grid, on the Northern European grid, and gradually were able to compensate the fall in frequency, recover, and they didn't face any shutdown. Because of this capability of the network to disconnect, the Southern European system was reactivated in 1 hour from the original blackout. So I'm going back to the presentation, basically with a question. We are in two modern systems. In one, everything falls down and you have days with severe winter conditions and people without power. In the other one, you have 1 hour time, and 1 hour time in the Southern European system, the energy is back. Clearly, the need of managing an increasing amount of renewable energy is one of the challenges that the grid system will have to face. In addition to that, there are also considerations to be done on the sustainability of the grid. We all know that nobody wants to have a big trestle nearby the house, so nobody wants to have batteries. We know also that transformers, insulators contain gases like SF6 that are to the environment. So the grid will have to take into consideration an increasing attention to the sustainability, an increasing attention to what people would like to have. And this is something that is becoming a strong component of the transmission system operator and the distribution system operators. Last but not least, the events we are showing and the increasing number of fires, of storms, of floodings are giving the opportunity to the grid to represent a help and aid for the environment. In my recent experience, we installed artificial intelligence devices, weather stations, wind monitoring, fires, cameras that could detect fires, and even cameras that were used in order to avoid poaching of wildlife in reserves. So the grid may represent an opportunity to monitor the territory and prevent the catastrophic events we have seen earlier. All in summary, what we are talking about are the pillars of the mission of the grid system operator, so the DSO and the TSO. security as a capacity to deal with unforeseeable events, the resiliency, so the ability of the system to withstand stresses like the winter we have seen and the severe weather conditions. Efficiency, adequacy, and quality of the service is a customer-focused activity that grid operators will have to take in consideration. And more important is the capacity of the system operators to adequate, to progress, to develop their network in anticipating what the demand in terms of connection, in terms of consumption will be in the future. Last but not least, grid cannot be any longer build whatever you want, but they have to take into account that there are people living nearby, and there are people living and they want to live, and they have the right to live with more sustainable grid equipment. So another important aspect that they will have to take into account as developing the grid is the curtailment. So as we know, and this is especially sometimes lived with frustration from project and power generation plants owners, very frequently the renewable energy is curtailed, is cut. Is not. We are not able to exploit the totality of the energy we produce. And the reason is that the grid is not ready to export, to transfer the entire capacity that the renewable energy are able to produce. This is extremely important in driving investment, because investment should take into consideration that not only the connection of the plants, but the capacity of the grid to interconnect and therefore to distribute the available power at regional level and where as much as possible. So transmission systems and interconnections are an enabler to connect additional power available, but also an important element in order to avoid curtailment. So this is why we think that the grids and the transmission system are, at the end of the day, the backbone of the national and regional electrical system. We say they connect generation, and more and more with renewable energy, generation is located very far from the consumption points. Once upon a time, industrialized areas had their own power plant. It was a coal-fired or gas-fired power plant. It was sitting just beside the factory and providing electricity where needed. Today is not any longer like that. Electricity is produced in one area, and that area is very often very, very far from the location where this electricity is needed. So additional investments are required in order to guarantee the resiliency, and very often the cross-border interconnections, the main line connecting different countries or different areas in very large countries, are a solution in order to, first of all, share power. When there is power in Romania, when there is light in Romania, perhaps there is not yet light in Spain. But the fact that the two systems are connected through an electricity network brings renewable energy very far away. So the interconnection, the grid backbone will enable electricity to flow, and will enable, most important, the development of regional markets. A regional market which at the end of the day will have a positive impact on consumers. So in addition to that, they will always, they will obviously guarantee the security of supply, increase resiliency, and more projects can be executed at lower cost. And this is probably the most important part for us around this table, being developers of projects, of renewable projects, or different kind of projects. The availability, strong, solid network that will enable to export the power produced is a fundamental enabler for a project to be viable, to be investable, to take place. At the end of the day, then the transmission and distributor operators will have three main areas on which to focus, developing their investments. So they have to anticipate and optimize the investment. They have to facilitate the authorization, so move early enough in order to get the investment authorized and get them the project executed. Now, when I think about Italy and the time required to develop a transmission project, it takes, on the average, 12 years. So consider what a renewable project may take, 2-3 years. Well, a transmission project takes 12 years, 8 of which are associated with authorization and 4 are associated with the execution. So this is why a transmission system operator, a distribution system operator, when thinking about upgrading the entire capacity, upgrading the network, needs to be much early enough, needs to somehow model and understand how the load and the generation will change in the next decades in order to program early enough adequate investments. The second task that DSOs and TSOs will have is the one of integrating, enabling energy transition by integrating increasing variable generation, reduce curtailment, and integrate the distributed resources. Last but not least, and we have seen it, the grid requires faster timing, faster time of reaction. The faster the reaction it is, the more preventable are catastrophic event and the snowball impact on the grid. That comes with modernizing the grid, the smart meters at the user level, increased resiliency and data management, as well as the cybersecurity. If you think about how critical a grid could be, because serving a number of strategic systems, cybersecurity is becoming a concern nowadays for the grid, and so more investments are coming on the grid supply. But at the end of the day, what is extremely important is a centrally coordinated planning. I'm adding a quote here from an executive in the United States, which somehow highlights the importance. And in the United States, we have seen it earlier, is extremely important to enhance the interregional planning of infrastructures. We will see that this is a critical element for that geography in the next few slides. So moving to have a quick look at the investment outlook for the energy sector and in the next decades. I could take this slide and I could change this slide with any other one that is projecting somehow massive investment. In all these slides, there is a recurrent equation. For every dollar spent in new renewable capacity, we will have a dollar spent in grid transmission or distribution. So this is when and where, I mean, those that come from the transmission environment are saying for every dollar of renewables you need an equivalent investment in grid. Without the investment in grid, you will not be able to invest on renewables. So it would be extremely important to see where geography, where these investments are progressing in parallel, to understand if there is capacity for that country to host additional generation. If my project, I'm generating power, am I located in a place where the grid is growing in parallel with the growth of the renewable? Is there a capacity there that can accommodate my project? Let's bear in mind that for every dollar spent in generation, you will have to see an equivalent investment in grid. And this is confirmed by the outlook on the transmission and distribution investments. If we look at the more conservative or the net zero economy, you will see that the investments in transmission and distribution are going to be massive in the next decades in order to accommodate the energy transition. Now, thinking about investments and thinking about enabling geographies, we need to move a moment back and understand the regulatory framework and the evolution that has been characterizing the regulatory framework in the past decades. And so we can understand where we stand now and why things are moving at a different speed in different geographies. The 80s were basically yet characterized by vertical integration of utilities, private mainly in the United States, public in Europe and South America and other geographies. While moving towards the 90s, we see the first unbundling attempts, especially in Europe. US started thinking about how to bring in to open the electricity sector, and they created the independent system operators as those managing the system with the intent of differentiating them from those that are also owning the assets. And in Latin America, the first unbundling also started privatization of segment of the grid in particular. So from the 2000 until 2015 is where we see the biggest boost in creating independency in between the generation, the transmission, and the distribution, especially in Europe with the creation of the transmission system operators. And we see also new market models with the entry in projects like in the United Kingdom for the offshore HVDC connections of the private sector, of investors. In the US, the first 1,000 order opened the competitiveness in a certain way to newcomers into the bidding process, although then the qualification process would still prefer and give advantage to the incumbent utilities. This is something that is still in place in the United States, is another bottleneck probably for further investments, while LATAM has now progressed with further privatization boost and they have quite well advanced in terms of investments in the grid, just because of this reason, because private owners, private sectors and investors can own and operate segment of the grid under the coordination of single system operators. What we see in the recent past is that the model firstly in place in the United Kingdom, so the presence of private investors in projects that then are made available for the system operators to operate, is being taken into as an example also in other geographies. So, for example, this is valid for the northeast of the United States, where massive developments are going on in the offshore wind industry. And for those projects, solutions with private sectors partnering with local developers and working directly under the framework established by the state impacted by the project is created. A clear example is the offshore link being bid last year by the state of New Jersey. But also we see something similar also in the Middle East. And another example are the subsea cables being in execution at present, connecting the main production island, oil production islands in UAE, in Abu Dhabi, with the mainland through a joint venture where investors, developers, and the state-owned Transco are participating in order to execute the project. Now, looking at the planning of the activity in different geography, we see that where projects are moving is because there is a central coordination point. Typically, this happens in Europe, where through ENTSO-E and the European Community has been created a list of projects of common interest, which brings a project with benefit for the entire community to the table, to priority to financing. And through this scheme, a very large number of very important projects has been executed or is under execution, and they are all projects that are the bottlenecking grid connections from one area to the other of the European community. In the United States, as we said, the situation is slightly different. So we do have a segmentation of the market that somehow segregates regulated opportunity, mainly still in the hands of incumbent utilities, and merchant projects, which are suffering very long development times. As a matter of fact, because of this gap in the regulatory framework, the queue of projects that are waiting for an interconnection is over 700. It's estimated to be over 700 gigawatts. That's why the Biden administration has committed a massive investments in the transmission, especially in the interregional interconnections. I will move quickly to another snapshot, one of Southern Africa. Here we have a situation where we do have an interregional organization. It's called South African Power Pool, for example. So there is an analysis, and there is priorities are set among different projects in order to somehow advance those that are going to bring a benefit in the exchange of energy that is foreseen and will be needed in the energy transition, in between the gas of Mozambique, the sun of Namibia, the coal generation of South Africa, the water of and the hydro of DRC. However, what we see here is a gap in between the South African power pool planning and the respective national investment plan. So things are not progressing. There is a gap within the national investment plan. You see utilities vertically integrated, and you see that these utilities are more focused perhaps on facilitating renewable generation projects, but they haven't sorted out yet how to finance and how to move forward with large transmission projects. So you could expect delay in the final implementation of these plans that may impact also the renewable projects being executed. Asia, we do have similarities, although there are countries more advanced in the public sector participating into investments in transmission and grid. I will move quickly forward to maintain the timing of this presentation, just going through the different models. So the financial ownership and merchant is a model that is becoming popular, especially in North America. This is already, but basically we have solutions that are somehow enabling the investors to own a single line of the network and make it available for the transmission system operator. There are IPPs that have to foresee their connection, and we see it as a very relevant and impacting problem in several of our projects. When you see a small solar plant that has to build up perhaps an HV connection, that is an extremely high impact on the capex of that project. Better conditions are those that are applied in South America, where you have sections of the grid under long-term concession with a transmission owner and operator, and this is a model that seems to be the most advanced in enabling investment and enabling an acceleration in the energy transition. There could be large segment, a portion of the grid. There could be single line, but this is somehow the most viable, the most efficient way to accelerate investment in the grids. And it requires implementing long-term concession, requires modification in the regulatory framework. There are countries that are ready, prepared to do so. There are many other countries that are not prepared. And in my opinion, this is a very important point to look at while developing investments. I will move to the technology constraints, because while we see that we have seen earlier that the regulatory framework is a very important aspect to be considered while developing projects. The other one is associated to the capacity of the grid to transfer a large volume of energy at a very large distance. And for that, more and more in use, as we are aware, is the HVDC. So the DC is becoming extremely important in the transmission of high volumes of energy at a very large distance. In addition, the DC is environmental friendly because the distance in between conductors, distance in between lines is much smaller than the HVAC lines. Through an HVDC back-to-back link, you can connect different regions, even with a synchronous grid, so with different frequency, and that is also another important aspect in order to debottleneck interregional connections. Grid stability is higher, notoriously, because the reaction of a converter station through software can be controlled in a faster way. They are more expensive, and there is another important limitation compared to the HVAC network. DC networks cannot be unlimited, cannot guarantee unlimited connection. So when we think about, for example, bringing in energy for North Africa to Europe, we are still thinking about a single port-to-pole, point-to-point connection, while obviously in the future we will have to build a submarine grid, a submarine network capable to connect a much wider number of terminals, capable to simulate similar conditions to the ones we have with the overhead lines in AC. We are not yet there, and this is one of the main obstacles for the larger expansion of projects, both in the offshore area and also in conditions like North Africa versus Europe, in guaranteeing the possibility of the exchange of power within the two sides of the Mediterranean Sea. I would then move now to some consideration on the power distribution. So we are moving down with a range of voltage. We are moving down with the electricity voltage, and the situation changes slightly because we get closer to where the load is. We get closer to us. We get closer to the consumption point, and we see the fundamental activity that the distribution system operators will have to consider to do as a core of the energy transition will be the one of guaranteeing a much higher level of flexibility in the management of the load. As we see in the picture, I mean, the grid capacity required to manage a peak, a non-rationalized load, is much higher than managing a grid which has already foreseen mitigation in terms of peak management. So this is what we think about when we think about shifting peak load shifting from peak hours to lower peak hours, and this will be a fundamental element of the energy transition for the distribution system operators. How do we get there? Well, we get there with I would say two main stream of work. The one on the right side of this slide, which focuses on modernization, digitalization of the grid, smart meters, and storage. So it is all what has to do with giving the distribution grid an agility that is not traditionally embedded in the grid the way it's constructed, but that we will require in order to be able to react to the disruption created by the renewables in a much faster way. So modernizing the infrastructure, substations, lines, digitalizing substation, digitalizing control centers, third parties, consumers, installing smart meters able to monitor our consumption and able also to help in flattening the peak consumption curve. On the other side, the energy transition means that we'll have to change more things to electricity. More things shall be electrical. So electrification of buildings, replacing traditional fossil fuels supplies like gas or heat oil, and as well as large industries, large consumers will have to consume more power, to rely more on power than on traditional fossil fuels. And the electrification of the mobility sector is also something we hear to talk about very, very much. And when we talk about it, we tend to focus on road transport, on electrical vehicles. The reality is that in many countries, the railway transport system is still relying on fossil fuels. And when you go to large ports, you see huge ships that are still burning their fossil fuels to keep the systems on. So electrification means increasing not only the number of electrical vehicles and the charging points, but also converting ports to cold ironing. So the capacity of supplying power to these big ships directly from the quays, and changing the railway system to electrical transportation as it is in so many countries, but not everywhere. Additional renewables will have to be integrated, and we will have to build a stronger grid. Even on the medium voltage and low voltage, we will have to build a stronger grid capable to resist and to withstand the catastrophic event we have seen earlier. When we look at the investments and distribution in the power distribution segment, we see that there are 3-4 key elements: electrification of building and industry, so the shift from fossil fuel to electricity, integration of renewables, modernizations, digitization, and smart meters are the key element of the future investments in the power distribution segment. And when we look at it, as we said earlier, the digitization, replacing obsolete infrastructure, building stronger and more resilient grid, monitoring the consumption, managing the information we receive from the grid in order to be able to respond faster to the peak load and shape the load in a way that we preserve the stability of the grid. Smart meters are the actions where we are the investments where we see more focus for the energy transition. I would say that this was pretty much what I wanted to share with you. As planned, we are leaving a few minutes for questions and answers. If there are any, I would be able and happy to address them right now. Thank you.
Definitely, yes. Thank you very much, Giovanni. What an interesting topic and information that you shared in a always fascinating and kind of engaging way. So definitely there are questions. We have shortlisted, well, several. I'm not sure if we'll have enough time to go through all of them, but let's do as many as we can. So the first one is, what are the key enablers of a sustainable energy transition? And in particular, what's the role of TSOs and DSOs?
Yeah, so this is a great opportunity to reiterate somehow the elements, the pillars that we have highlighted at the beginning of the presentation. I think that TSO and DSOs have the responsibility to give us a stronger grid, a more resilient grid, to increase the quality of the services that they are giving us, and are they going to do it? I mean, the investments we have seen are fundamental, and basically we have been talking about regional connections. So the capacity to interconnect different regions in our countries is a fundamental enabler for grid stability, to create a market. And when there is a market, there is competition. If there is competition, there is a possibility of adding additional capacity, more projects, and improving the bill that all of us are paying at the end of the month. So great focus on their development plan, their focus on security, quality of the service, and resiliency of the grid, I would say, are the key elements of their missions.
Very good. Well, I think you have covered another question asked by Mohammed. Perhaps I'll read it out just in case if there is something you want to add. So he's asking, from your point of view, how can a country improve, update its regulatory framework to move towards a smart, efficient power grid?
Yeah, I think that as we have seen, there are countries that have moved forward in the concept of owning and managing. So there are countries that, especially Africa, is extremely focused on vertically integrated utilities. And vertically integrated utilities is not an enabling environment, because all solutions have to come internally. And if there is no budget, there will not be investments. So enabling the private sector entering the transmission and distribution market is a fundamental enabler in order to change, in order to fast track investments like South America have done. How do you do that? You need new policies, and you need a regulatory framework that will isolate the system operator. So who controls and dispatching the energy from who owns the facilities? And this is a common concept in the infrastructural market.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we'll move to the next one. Why interconnections are crucial for the energy transition, and what role can the private sector play in the development of such infrastructures?
Yeah, as we said earlier, the interconnections are a fundamental enabler because are connecting markets. If they connect markets, they create opportunities. They create opportunities because prices will equalize. They create opportunities for consumers, because they can then use a cheaper electricity to invest, to develop their activities. They will create opportunities for project developers, because a more accessible network will be an important enabling factor for new investments. How many projects we have seen? And one of the first questions we ask is there a grid connection? Can the electricity be exported? So these are the key elements. Out of the three questions, fundamental questions, one is, have you got the grid connection? Is there a possibility to export the power you generate? So interconnections are the highways of the electricity. If you build the highways and they are connected to roads that are bringing to your plant, then you have the possibility to evacuate the electricity you generate. You are on the market. Your investment is viable. This is a great enabler for all what we do.
Okay, so there's another one. So how the renewable projects will be taken into account in the TSOs and DSOs development plans?
I think very important is the planning process of DSO and TSOs. What we see now often is they are short-sighted, either by government policies or by budget constraints. But then is a boomerang, because if you are not able to insert in your 10 years or 20 years development plan the capacity requested by project developers, then you will not be able to sustain the energy transitions. Energy transition is all about being able to implement project on fast track basis. Is all about dramatically increasing the capacity of a country to produce, of a region to produce electricity from renewable sources. So if TSOs and DSO will not include in their planning process the request that they have of new renewable energy connections, they will just not be able to. They will be the main obstacle for the energy transition.
Understood. Well, people are not leaving, so if you don't mind, we'll take another 5 minutes of your time, Giovanni, just to cover a few more questions. Everyone is very, very much interested in this topic because, grid and interconnection been always a main bottleneck, as you kind of earlier mentioned. So do you think that smart grids will be a good plan to improve the grid's key pillars that you mentioned earlier in your presentation?
So smart grids are certainly a fundamental element of the grid. And by smart grid, I will add a number of things. So artificial intelligence devices, capacity of modeling and predefining somehow the curve of consumption that will be required, community of prosumers, so the capacity also of the smart grid to exchange, to supply electricity to itself. They will be fundamental in semi-highlands of energy communities. So there are energy communities that are operating in a highland mode, the proper islands, but also remote rural communities in Africa and different countries. Smart grids are going to characterize more and more as well our defense system, which will have somehow to rely more and more in self-sufficiency. But at the same time, when they come together, so when they come on the grid, will be extremely useful in terms of guaranteeing a positive exchange of electricity, of energy to the grid, and therefore to complement the grid, which will rely more and more in distributed generation, in distributed capacity. So a smart grid is a semi-self-sufficient system that can be self-sufficient at times. It can also export electricity when and if required. And so this will be fundamental. But to enable all of this, they really need to be smart. So there will be a need of all these systems to talk to each other, and there will be a need of a common dispatching processes and procedures that will have to take more and more into account the smart communities and the smart entities.
Okay. So one of the kind of questions they're asking about examples of wheeling regulations. Could you give some wheeling? I'm not too sure what are wheeling regulations. Perhaps you would. As I understand, I think that would be related to the grid.
Well,
wheeling, they call wheeling regulation. I'm not sure what it is, though.
Yeah, I think that is the possibility to access sections of the grid in order to be able to export the power you produce with your power plants. And I think that a very interesting example of that is Chile. Chile has changed the regulation a few years ago with a new approach. This is called acceso abierto. So it's an open access. So whatever lines has a capacity of transporting, so as a spare capacity, that spare capacity can be utilized by anyone. So Chile was characterized by the presence of very high voltage and high voltage lines in the north, so in the Atacama Desert, where the mining sector was operating. And this new framework enables private developers to utilize the private sector's lines if they have spare availability in order to transfer their electricity. So I think that that's a great enabler because basically enables to tie in whatever line, provided that there is capacity, and then the owner will be compensated for that. It's not that he's going to do it for free of charge, but it's just making available all the resources of a country in order to accommodate more renewable generation in operation.
Well,
Okay, so questions are still coming, but I think what we're going to do
have to work.
what we're
Well,
going to do
what
is
I found
play those questions and then perhaps get them answered and share them with people, with our audience later on through email, perhaps. Otherwise, we might stay here for a while and keep everyone. So I'll let Oksana to wrap up, and I really appreciate your time today, Giovanni, and your input.
Thank you.
I actually learned about myself. So thanks for joining us tonight.
Well, indeed, I actually kind of find it quite astounding that for each dollar of investment in renewable energy, you need $1 of investment into a grid, right? And there is so much talk about investment into green energy and energy transition, but unfortunately, I don't hear, because I presume because it's still largely kind of dominated by public sector, by governments, right? And that's where, and it's centralized. That's where I think this planning is so essential, considering that it takes 12 years to build a project. I mean, I'm thinking about all these projects that are applying for grid connection, right? In so many countries, that the application for grid connection far exceeds already grid capacity, right? So this is incredibly important topic, and something that is to be definitely aware of, right? So hence I wanted to cover it tonight. For many people, it's still morning. So thank you so much for such an insightful, informative presentation, Giovanni. I definitely learned a lot as well. I learned a lot from our advisors and project developers, and this is definitely quite an enlightening session. Whoever have attended, please feel free to download handouts. The presentation contains a lot of interesting information. For those who couldn't attend because of the time difference and other things, we will be sending you this replay. You'll be watching it later. Thank you so much for joining us. Our next webinar will be already after summer break, because I know that many of you will be heading for holidays. So you enjoy and have fantastic summer. We're looking forward to connecting with you for our next webinar. In the meantime, of course, if you have a good project, please do reach out to us, share it with us. Let's see what we can do.
I just posted again the links for the people who joined a bit later for the Funding Accelerator program and the event. That's where you can submit the projects, or just email them directly to me or Oksana. I think everyone have our email addresses.
Exactly. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much. I wish you a wonderful evening or a wonderful day. Thank you, Giovanni, once again.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good evening.